Chapter 3. Margot James was a redhead like Sarah, but all resemblance stopped there. She was tall and voluptuous, her gestures and movements were quick and almost bird-like, and she talked with blunt, brisk cheerfulness, contentedly misusing words and mixing metaphors right and left. Tucker had plenty of time to observe all of these traits when he had returned from his quick retreat to shower, shave, and dress, because Margot insisted on fixing breakfast, telling him that Sarah always slept till 9 at least. I'm the early bird and she's the bad. Tucker stopped himself from wincing. You mean the night owl? Margot waved a spatula. Yeah, right. It's amazing that we get along so well. We're really as different as afternoon and morning. Take our antiques, for instance. Sarah has a real feeling for what's genuine, but doesn't have a clue how things should be priced, whereas I know the value of a thing down to the penny, but can be fooled by a fake really easily. Sounds like you two are perfect partners, Tucker commented, cautiously sipping coffee that was very, very strong, and had a shot at holding a spoon upright in the cup. Yeah, it's been great. Hey, I fed that cat she's adopted and let him out. He seemed to want out. I was supposed to let him out last night, Tucker admitted, but he disappeared on me. Margot shrugged. Maybe he slept in Sarah's room. She told me he does that sometimes. Tucker wondered when, in that case, Sarah had let the cat out of her room, but it didn't seem important enough to worry about. In a lightning change of mood, Margot said with sudden gravity, Geez, I was sorry to hear about Sarah's house. She loved that place, poured her heart into restoring it. How did you hear about it? He asked casually. On TV, the news last night. That's why I came back ahead of schedule, of course, even though she didn't call me. Maybe especially because she didn't call me. I know Sarah. She's as strong as bronze. Steel, Tucker murmured, unable to stop himself. Yeah, steel. Strong as steel, thinks she can handle anything and everything on her own, but she's had a fairly bad year, and I just don't know how much more she can take. First, that damn mugging, and then David. Her gaze cut swiftly to Tucker. You know about David? He nodded without comment. Margot was obviously still trying to size up the relationship, since Tucker had introduced himself only by name, and was clearly disappointed that he didn't react in some dramatic way to mention of the last man in Sarah's life. Yeah, well, first we find out the bastard was not one of your basic in sickness and in health guys when she got hurt. He could barely bring himself to visit her every couple of days, for Christ's sake, and made it screamingly obvious he wanted to be someplace else when he did show up. Then, when she finally comes out of the coma, able to see the future, Tucker supplied when her voice trailed off. She grimaced. Yeah, I didn't know if you knew. Again, he nodded without comment. Margot flipped a fried egg, the 5th so far, with 2 more still in the pan, onto a plate on the counter beside the stove, and Tucker was mildly tempted to ask how many people she planned to feed, but he didn't want her to be distracted from the subject at hand. She really can do it, Margot said, defending her friend staunchly. It scared the hell out of her at first. Still does, I guess. Well, wouldn't it you? Definitely. Margot nodded. Yeah, me too. In fact, well, never. The page isn't, loading. Well, never mind that. The point is that Sarah's life has been hell this year, and now the house, jeez. The news said the cops suspected arson. So I understand. He didn't mention the stranger who might still be outside watching. He hadn't been able to casually look out a window without drawing her attention, and he wasn't sure how much, if anything, Margot knew. That means the insurance won't pay off for ages, she said in a practical spirit. Damn. She can stay here as long as necessary, of course. This place is half hers. But it would be a lot better if she could concentrate on rebuilding right away. With everything at 5s and 6s like this, she'll have way too much time to think about stuff. Tucker didn't bother to correct her about what happened to David. He probed, wondering whether she knew that Sarah's latest prediction supposedly concerned her own death. Margot's exotic face darkened. That son of a bitch. I know you aren't supposed to speak ill of the dead, but if you ask me, he got what he deserved. If he'd treated Sarah with a modicum of respect, things might have been different. Tucker cast about in his mind and settled on modicum. Yeah, a modicum of respect. But he didn't, Margot continued, oblivious of having misspoken. Oh, he was charming enough. Sarah's a sucker for charm. But he sure as hell backed off fast enough when she got hurt. He made a pass at me while she was in the hospital. Can you believe that? She shot Tucker a fierce look. Poor Sarah, lying there with a head injury, and the doctors shaking their heads because they don't know if she'll ever come out of it, and that bastard's leering and pinching me on the ass. Tucker just stopped himself from commenting that he could understand that another man's urge, based though it had certainly been, as complimentary as he meant the words to be, he was both old enough and wise enough to know she wouldn't appreciate them. But things really changed when Sarah got out of the hospital, he asked instead. With David, you mean? Margot nodded. Oh, yeah. Well, before that, really. When she predicted the nurse would have her baby, and the hotel fire, she predicted that in front of a bunch of us, David included. He thought she was crazy when she said it had happened. Then when it did, he really thought she was crazy. And it scared him, I'll say. But before he could come up with a halfway decent excuse to break it off with her, she saw his future. He lasted about a week with Sarah worrying about railroad crossings, then bolted for California so fast you'd have thought his ass was on fire. And died out there at a railroad crossing. I didn't grieve for him, but Sarah nearly fell apart. For a week, she wouldn't even leave her house, wouldn't talk to anybody except me, and hardly to me. Margot frowned a little as she finished the 8th and final egg and turned the burner off, then plugged in the toaster and reached for the loaf of bread on the counter. I don't know if she would have come out of it except that the visions, the waking nightmares, stopped for a while. It gave her a chance to get her bearings, I guess. And when the waking nightmares came back, Margot shook her head. Well, either they didn't come very often, or she didn't tell me about all of them, 'cause I only know about a few, mostly minor things, except for that serial killer out in San Francisco. That one really freaked her out. She paused for a moment or so, then added soberly, but she's been awfully quiet these last months, awfully quiet. Tucker drew a breath and said, You're afraid of her too, aren't you? She looked at him, those brilliant eyes darkened, and said shakily, Oh, I'm afraid. But not of her. I'm afraid of what she can see, because she saw my future, and she won't tell me what it is. The morning sun was halfway to its noon position, and long shadows stretched from the west side of the building in downtown Richmond. A tall woman with short and rather spiky blonde hair stood motionless on the balcony, virtually invisible in the shadows and among tall potted plants. She cursed absently as the palm fronds, stirred by the breeze, waved in front of her binoculars, shifted her weight just a bit, then went still again as her field of vision cleared. Her attention was fixed on the rather shabby hotel across the street and a particular room a floor below her own fifth-floor vantage point. The drapes at that window had not been drawn, and a generous percentage of the room was visible to her. Careless. Duran must be losing his touch. 2 men were in the room. She would have given a lot to know what they discussed as they sat so casually across from each other. But there had been no time to plant listening devices, and from her angle it was impossible even to make an attempt at lip reading, a skill she had worked very hard to acquire. She lowered the binoculars, lips pressed so tightly together there was no hint of softness there, and vivid green eyes, furious. "Damn," she whispered, "damn, damn, damn." She eased back through the balcony doors into the apartment she had, so to speak, sublet, and bent over a lovely Regency desk. The former occupant's work had been unceremoniously shoved aside, and an open laptop sat in the center of the pretty floral blotter. "Geez, enough with the plant motif," she muttered, momentarily distracted as she glanced around at the very pretty, very feminine, very floral bedroom in which she stood. Frilly was hardly Murphy style. Barely suppressing a shudder, she fixed her attention on the screen of her laptop. A section of a city map, brilliantly colored, met her intent gaze. She studied it for a long moment, frowning, then tapped a few keys to produce a close-up of the section. Her index finger traced the distance from a square representing the hotel across the street to a quieter street where former residences had been turned into small businesses. Too close. Damn it, they have to know where she is. Murphy wasn't even conscious of speaking aloud, so accustomed to working alone that talking to herself had become a habit. The words had barely left her mouth when the very faint sound of a key in the lock of the apartment's front door brought her head up alertly, and this time the curse that left her lips was a mere whisper. "Just my luck that Ms. Bank Vice President went off this morning and left her damn lunch on the kitchen counter." Swiftly, unwilling to wait and find out whether the apartment's legal occupant would choose to come into the bedroom for some reason, she closed the laptop and dropped it into the pouch hanging against her hip. Without a wasted motion, she backed out onto the balcony and slid the door closed. There was a fire escape, which was good, but leaving the shelter of the greenery meant she was too visible, even in the shadows, for her peace of mind. Still, being seen by the wrong person was infinitely preferable to being arrested for breaking and entering, which was what likely would happen if she remained on the balcony. She moved quickly and quietly down to street level, and once there, paused only long enough to stow the binoculars in their pocket of the pouch containing the computer. The pouch was not conspicuous, resembling nothing so much as a large, if bulky, shoulder bag, but someone might well have taken notice of the binoculars. A quick glance around told her that none of the few people about seemed interested in her. She was just about to relax when a casual glance up at the window across the street brought her to a dead stop just 2 steps away from the fire escape. Duran was at the window, and he saw her. He was too far away for her to recognize his face, but she knew it was him. She knew he was looking at her, and she knew he recognized her. She could feel it. Like some night animal caught unexpectedly in the light, she stood frozen, not breathing, a panicky sensation stirring deep inside her. It was not a feeling she was willing to define to herself, though if asked she would have said angrily that it was hatred, pure hatred. If asked, Duran would have said the same thing. The moment seemed to last forever, and if a car horn had not rudely shattered the quiet of the morning, there was no telling how long she would have stood there, staring up at the man in the window. But the horn brought her to her senses, and with this soft little sound, more violent than a curse, she hurried to the corner and around it, taking herself out of his field of vision. He turned away from the window and looked across the room at the other man. "What is it?" Varden asked, instantly alert. "We've run out of time," Duran said. "Sarah?" She was struggling up out of the depths of an exhausted sleep, frantic to wake up and get control, to be able to shut out the whisper in her mind. "Sarah, you must—" Her eyes snapped open, and Sarah was awake. Her heart was pounding, and she could hear her own shuddery breathing. As always, once she was awake and aware, the voice fell silent. That voice, gosh, that voice! It had begun only a few days before, creeping into her awareness during both waking and sleeping dreams, during vulnerable or unguarded moments, a whisper without identity, eerily insistent. She didn't even know whether it came from inside her or somewhere else. It felt alien to her, yet she couldn't be sure it was, because all of this felt alien. The dreams, these frightening new abilities, the feelings she couldn't explain even to herself. All she really knew was that all of it terrified her. She pulled herself out of bed and went to take a shower, heavy-eyed after lying awake for most of the night. It wasn't until she came back into her bedroom and began dressing that she heard a loud laugh and the cheerful notes of Margot's voice. "Margot, dear goodness." Sarah knew she should have called her, of course. Last night she could have called her and reassured her that it was okay, that she didn't have to come charging back home to support her partner and friend. Anything to keep Margot safely away from here. But Sarah's thoughts last night had been fixed on her own troubles and on Tucker Mackenzie. Real. He was real. Not a figment of her imagination, not a face in a half-remembered nightmare, probably formed out of random features drifting like flotsam in her subconscious. Real. One more indication to her that the prediction of her own future was going to come true. One more sign that it was useless to fight what had to be. That was what she would have said, had in fact said yesterday. But Tucker hadn't merely presented himself as a sign or a symbol or an indication. He was a real man, and being a real man, he had his own thoughts and opinions and his own agenda. He wanted to believe. He wanted to believe in her. Sarah had seen something similar more times than she could count these last months. People with anxious voices and eager eyes and desperate smiles, asking her, begging her for answers. The difference was, those people hadn't wanted the truth. Nope, they wanted answers, but only those answers that would make them feel good, or at least better, about their problems, their lives. They wanted reassurance, comfort, hope. They hadn't been able to find it within their own belief system, whether that be religion or something else. So they had come to her. "Tell me my husband forgave me before he died. Tell me my runaway daughter isn't walking the streets somewhere or lying dead in a gutter. Tell me I'm right to choose my lover. Tell me my mother didn't suffer. Tell me there's no hell. Tell me there is a heaven. Tell me I have a future. Tell me life doesn't just end. Tell me, please tell me." Sarah had discovered for herself that hope was a fragile thing, difficult to hold on to in the harsh face of day-to-day living. She blamed no one for trying to hold on to it, or reach for it again after it had been lost or driven away. But she was helpless to offer hope to others when all she saw was bleak and dark and violent and without promise. She had expected Tucker to ask her for hope, but that wasn't what he wanted from her. He wanted the truth. He didn't care whether it proved to be a dark and bleak truth. He didn't care whether it caused him pain. He just had to know the truth. She could have given him most of what he wanted of her within the first hour of knowing him. That she had not was due to several reasons, though he would doubtless disagree with her assessment. She knew he was not yet ready to hear the truth he needed to hear, not yet ready to listen and understand. Proof of that had been his shock reaction to the tiny glimpse of the truth she had shown him just after they said goodnight. And then there was his part in the sequence of events that all these new instincts of hers told her had already begun. His arrival told her that the countdown had started. With his truth revealed to him, he would no doubt turn away from her, and she knew it wasn't yet time for him to do that. There was another reason for him to be here with her. They had someplace to go together, someplace where it was cold and bleak. Her rendezvous with death. And that was the final reason why she had not offered him his truth, because he had intrigued her with his challenge, with the possibilities of what he saw. He was so sure that fate could be changed, that destiny was merely the sum of one's choices. Sarah needed his certainty. She didn't want to die. There were things she hadn't done yet, places she hadn't seen, experiences that eluded her. She was not ready to leave life, at least not willingly. But she had no hope of her own left, no certainty that her path could be chosen by her. All she saw was darkness. If he was right, if there was even a small chance he was right, then Sarah needed his help to attempt to change her destiny. She needed his certainty to keep her going, his hope to replace the hope she had lost. It was thoughts such as these that kept Sarah awake long into the night. But when she heard Margot's buoyant voice in the other room, thoughts of her own dim future were cast aside. Margot was home, in Richmond, the last place on earth she needed to be today. When Sarah came out of the bedroom to greet the other two, her first glance and tentative smile at Tucker met a somewhat guarded response. She knew why, of course. Even a brief glimpse into someone else's soul left that soul feeling disturbingly naked. Psychic eyes aren't so fascinating when they're aimed at your soul, are they, Tucker? It hurt, though. Good morning, she said, impartially to both, but shifting her gaze immediately to Margot. You didn't have to come running back here, Margot. You shouldn't have. I was worried about you, kid. I didn't want you to be alone. Margot grinned suddenly. A pleased look that belied the anxiety in her expressive eyes. Didn't know about Tucker, obviously, or I wouldn't have barreled back here to be a sixth wheel. Third, Sarah corrected automatically. She looked at Tucker, caught the flicker of a laugh in his green eyes, and they shared a brief moment of silent amusement. Oh, right, third. As always, Margot accepted the correction amiably. Breakfast, Sarah? Just coffee. The pot was almost empty, and Sarah used that as an excuse to make fresh. Margot made the worst coffee in creation, and repeated instructions had done nothing to change that. You should eat, Margot protested. Look, at least some toast, and maybe the bacon Tucker didn't finish. All right, toast. Her head was pounding, and Sarah really didn't feel like arguing. Conscious of Tucker's silent scrutiny as she moved past him on the other side of the breakfast bar, she tried not to think about him, something that required a disturbing amount of effort. Instead, she tried to think of a way to get Margot to leave as soon as possible. She didn't want to frighten her friend, but even less did she want to lose her for good. Unbidden, the image that had haunted her for weeks rose starkly in her mind, all too clear and without ambiguity. Tomorrow's newspaper with the headline that turned Sarah's blood to ice. "Are you all right?" Tucker asked quietly. Sarah looked blatantly at him for a moment before she realized she'd been standing immobile with one hand on the bread box for just that instant too long. "I'm fine." She wondered idly what her expression looked like to make him look so doubtful. Really? She busied herself making toast while Margot leaned back against the counter, sipping her coffee, and Tucker sat at the bar drinking his, and both watched her. She had no idea what they had discussed before she had gotten up, no idea whether either had confided in the other. "Some psychic I am. I can't even get this cursed thing to work for me when I need it to." Before she could think of something casual to say, the silence was broken by the distant sound of a bell ringing below in the shop. "I forgot to turn the bell on up here," Sarah said. "It's past opening time. I'll go down and see who it is." Margot set her cup on the counter and headed for the door. "Whether we stay open today? Well, we'll see. In the meantime, you relax and eat your breakfast, talk to Tucker. See you two later." Sarah actually opened her mouth to warn her friend, then closed it even as the door closed behind Margot. What should I do? She had tried to warn David and had only gotten him killed. None of her other warnings had made the slightest difference, but this was so damn specific. Maybe it was different. "Sarah?" She looked at him. "What did you see in Margot's future?" She didn't mean to tell him, but heard her own frightened voice respond without hesitation. "Death." Tucker didn't look surprised, and his voice remained quiet. "Are you sure?" Sarah drew a breath. "I saw a Richmond newspaper with tomorrow's date, the front page. Below the headline there was a picture of Margot. The headline read, 'Local antiques dealer killed.' The first line began, 'Local businesswoman Margot James was killed yesterday afternoon in a bizarre accident that took place in her antique shop.'" Drawing another breath to steady a voice that shook uncontrollably, Sarah added bitterly, "Now you tell me if there's any way to misinterpret that." He was silent for a moment. "Which is why she's supposed to be out of town now?" Sarah nodded. "I shouldn't even have let her go down to the shop just now, but I don't know what to do. If I try to keep her out of the shop, if I warn her, I'm afraid I'll bring about the accident I want to prevent, like I did with David." "You don't know that you brought that about. He might have been killed at a railroad crossing if he had stayed here." "Yes, or he might not have. And Margot, I made sure she'd be away. I didn't call her about the house burning, hoping to keep her away, but now she's come back, as if she's fated to be here today. It was very clear what I saw. An accident this afternoon in the shop, but I don't know exactly when it's supposed to happen or what happens." "A bizarre accident," Tucker mused. I couldn't see what that meant, what actually happened. Sarah went to pour herself a cup of the fresh coffee, absently noting that the toast had popped up without her awareness and was now undoubtedly cold. Leaving it, she fixed her coffee and then turned back to face Tucker. "It isn't afternoon yet, and newspapers try to be precise, but it could happen at any time." Tucker frowned. "Wait a minute. Margot is supposed to be out of town, which means you're supposed to be the one in the shop, right?" She nodded. "It's just her and me, no other full-time staff. A couple of guys from the health club nearby help us out moving large pieces of furniture when we need to, but we do all the rest." "Why?" "Maybe it's my writer's imagination at work, but think about this, Sarah. Somebody's been watching you recently. You, not Margot. Yesterday your house burns down, probably due to arson. Today you're here, which is where you'd logically be after losing your house. It's even logical that you'd probably be downstairs working to occupy your mind, if nothing else. I mean, if Margot hadn't showed up, wouldn't you be down there now in answer to that bell? Of course. He waited, watching her. Sarah was a bit slow getting it, maybe because of her pounding head, or because her mind was filled with fears for Margot. But slowly the possibility he offered came into focus. You mean me? Somebody could be trying to kill me and gets Margot by mistake? She's a redhead too. Hard to mistake one of you for the other close up, but at a distance it wouldn't be so unlikely. Especially if you're likely to be down in the shop and Margot is supposed to be out of town. Maybe that bizarre accident you saw was a deliberate act intended to look accidental. Sarah didn't bother to ask him whether he actually believed she had seen the future. He was, as he'd said, suspending his disbelief, but only time and proof would convince Tucker that she could predict events that had not yet occurred. In any case, she was thinking more painful thoughts. I told you, there's no reason anybody would want to hurt me. And yet you predict your own death at the hands of some mysterious them you can't identify. His voice was not in the least sarcastic. It had not occurred to Sarah either to connect Margot's death with her own future or to consider her shadowy enemies apart from the enemy she felt sure they planned for her. But now, thinking about it, she had to admit that Tucker had made a number of points. Looked at objectively as he clearly could, it was obvious that Sarah was the target of whatever was happening. But why? Like any human being, she found it extremely difficult to even imagine that someone else might want to put a period to her existence, despite her own predictions. I don't understand why anyone would want me dead. The reasons people kill are usually simple, Tucker offered. Desperation, greed, jealousy, rage, fear. Sarah shook her head, unable to connect any of those powerful emotions to her life. I'm not even close enough to anyone to inspire anything like that. My friends are casual, except for Margot. I have no family to speak of, just cousins who aren't even a part of my life. How could I arouse those kinds of emotions in someone without knowing it? Even fear? He looked at her steadily. Sarah, your life changed dramatically 6 months ago. You became psychic. And as you said yourself, there are people out there who are terrified of the very idea of precognition. People very afraid of psychics, maybe even to the point of trying to start a witch hunt. They burned my house. Witches were burned. It wouldn't be the first time someone perceived as different became a target of intimidation tactics, he reminded her, and echoed her own thoughts when he added, suspected witches were burned. Nearly the first thing you said to me was that you were the neighborhood witch. But there would have been warnings, wouldn't there? Nasty phone calls, notes, or something worse left in my mailbox. Isn't that how it works? They wouldn't have started by setting my house on fire, would they? Tucker shrugged. I wouldn't have said so, but in these days of stalkers and serial killers, the extreme gets more common every day. Sarah accepted that reluctantly. So it's possible somebody wants me dead because I'm psychic. She shied away from anyone hating and fearing that much to focus on her friend's safety. Then if I'm the target, Margot should be out of danger if I send her away, right? If she's nowhere near me, she won't be an accidental target. That seems reasonable to suppose, Tucker agreed. Sarah looked at her watch. It's after 10. I should go downstairs and try to talk her into leaving Richmond before lunch. Will you help me convince her? I'll try. He hesitated, then added, if you'll take my advice, I think you should tell her the truth. She knows you've seen something, Sarah. It's worrying her. Yes, I know. Sarah turned the coffee pot off, then looked around in sudden awareness. Where's Pendragon? Margot fed him his breakfast and let him out, she said. He hesitated, then said, I never did let him out last night. He disappeared on me. Was he with you? No, not unless he decided to sleep under the bed. She shrugged, which she might have done. This is the first time I've spent the night here or the shop since he showed up, so I'm not sure about his nighttime habits. He's been altered, right? So not as likely to want to wander at night like intact Toms do. Absently, Sarah said, I thought you didn't know much about cats. There was a brief silence, and then Tucker said, I guess most people know that much. I guess. Yeah, I made sure he'd been neutered. Otherwise, I would have taken him to a vet. Too many stray cats around for my peace of mind. They live dangerous lives, poor things. With a shrug, she added, he probably belongs to someone in the area, given his condition and that collar. He's been somebody's cat, obviously cared for. Then maybe he went home after his breakfast. Maybe so. Ready to go down to the shop? As ready as I'll ever be. They left the apartment and went downstairs to the shop, finding Margot occupied with a customer. I had something a little more economical in mind, the attractive young woman was saying, somewhat wryly as she studied the price tag of a beautiful early Victorian writing desk. Margot chuckled. Antiques are always economical, especially if you're looking at long-term investment, Miss Desmond. Just think of having something this beautiful to pass down to your children. You mean instead of the cash? Miss Desmond grinned. Sarah recognized from Margot's happy expression that she expected to make a sale, so she didn't try to interrupt. Instead, she led Tucker through the maze of gleaming furniture to a back corner where a stunning ormolu-mounted Boulle bureau plat of Regency design acted as a desk where Sarah and Margot did the necessary paperwork for the shop. Nice place, Tucker commented. Thanks. It's taken us almost 8 years to get the kind of stock and clientele we dreamed about when we started. A lot of long hours and hard work went into old things, to say nothing of every penny Margot and I could come up with. She said it matter-of-factly, but with a trace of wistfulness, filled with the conviction that this part of her life was ending. She didn't know whether her prediction of a bleak future would be fulfilled, but she was sure, utterly sure, that her partnership with Margot was ending, one way or another. Sarah glanced back across the shop at Margot and the customer, then looked at her watch uneasily. It was still well before noon, but she wouldn't feel that her friend was out of danger until she was out of Richmond and far away from the shop. I think I'll wander around a bit, Tucker told her. I've always been interested in antiques. He nodded toward Margot, adding, sing out when you need me. Okay. Sarah sat down at the chair behind the desk and opened a file to go over several shipping invoices. It was busy work and nothing more. The clock in her head was ticking away minutes, and all she could think about was talking to Margot and getting her out of here. With that tense part of her awareness, she was conscious of Margot talking to the customer, leading her from piece to piece, but always returning to that Victorian writing desk. She clearly intended to sell the woman. Let me just sit here and think about it, the customer finally said, sitting down somewhat gingerly in a George III mahogany-framed dining chair. It's a tough decision, I know, Margot said sympathetically. I'll say, I do love that desk, though. We have a layaway plan, 10% down, and you can take a year or more to pay the balance. The customer groaned, you're an evil woman, tempting me. Margot laughed. It's something I've been accused of before, but what can I say? I like people to have beautiful things. That, Sarah reflected absently, was true. Sales techniques aside, Margot did genuinely enjoy the thought of the beautiful things she valued giving pleasure to others. My husband will shoot me, the customer said with another groan. He expects me to come home with a plain old desk, not an antique. I just stopped by here on impulse. Sometimes, Margot said, impulse is the best way to find the nice surprises in life. Yeah, the customer frowned. Look, give me a few minutes, will you please? I want to think about this. Her meaning was clear, and Margot smiled brightly. No problem, just call me when you're ready. Okay, thanks. Margot turned and headed toward the back of the shop where Sarah waited. Sarah rose to her feet, anxious to warn Margot and get her out of the shop as soon as possible, sale or no sale. But before she could leave the desk, the phone rang. Good morning, old things. This is Sarah, she said, as she answered automatically. Without preamble, a man said, I was in your shop the other day looking at an Irish mahogany breakfast wardrobe. I think I absentmindedly left a small black notebook inside. At least, I hope I did. Could you look for it, please? Sure, hang on just a minute. She put him on hold, then winced as the phone immediately rang again. Answering the second line, she found one of their shippers upset because he couldn't find the armoire he was supposed to be picking up. Sarah put him on hold as well, then began searching through the folders on the desk. Need a hand? Margot asked cheerfully. Sarah found the relevant folder. Oh, you noticed. She smiled at her partner. Guy on the other line lost a small black notebook here the other day. He says maybe inside that Irish breakfast. Could you check, please? You bet. Sarah turned her attention back to the aggravated shipper, relating the address where he was supposed to be and soothing him when it developed that the mistake had been his. She listened to his sheepish apologies, her gaze absently following Margot across the shop to the huge wardrobe, one of their most massive pieces. No problem, Mike, she murmured, hanging up the phone just as Margot reached the wardrobe and swung open the heavy doors. All Sarah remembered thinking afterward was, that candelabra on top shouldn't be wobbling like that. And then, in a terrifying instant, she realized why it was. Margot, it's falling! Sarah was too far away to help, and the wardrobe was so huge and heavy that even though Margot was reacting to the warning, turning her face white with shock, there was simply no way she could get out from under the thing in time. Sarah knew that. There was nothing she could do but watch, totally helpless. The scant few seconds that passed, stretching into a lifetime, she lived paralyzed with dread. Then she saw Tucker lunge from between two tall boys and grab Margot's arm, both of them now in the path of the toppling wardrobe. It was the last thing she saw, her eyes closing instinctively as the wardrobe crashed to the floor with a force that shook the entire building.